Dear Dr. Jordan Peterson, this is not a political message. Though sadly, in today's political climate, that sort of thing seems to be decided by the audience well after a piece of media is created, rather than by the creator himself. Regardless, that is not my intention. Rather, I want to be clear that this is something more akin to a religious piece of work. When I first had your videos suggested to me on YouTube, I must admit that I did not like you. To my younger, angst-ridden self, I perceived you as being like every other adult who had tried to sit me down and tell me how to live my life. Pretentious, out of touch, and woefully unable to even understand an iota of what someone as victimized and hurt as I was going through. This is, of course, because I was the only one in the world suffering at that time, and there was absolutely no possibility in my mind then that anyone could be suffering in the same fashion that I was. However, as my time in college went on, and I found myself often encouraged and indulging in the Persian Bazaar carefree and no responsibility lifestyle that was peddled to me by a variety of ideologies I was presented in the classroom, as well as in the plethora of house parties and bars at my university. Despite my most sincere and very best efforts to find some sort of meaning and fulfillment in these endeavors, I came up short again and again. So, one day, probably after what was another very fulfilling evening of pounding beers with the boys, I clicked on one of your videos as I ate my measly, greasy, and hastily made lunch in the dining hall. At first, I thought my preconceived notions to be true, but then I heard you say something that has stuck with me ever since, a thing that gave me hope in what has to be the most oxymoronic way possible. Life is suffering. I am an Orthodox Christian. I tend to stay away from talking about that on this channel because I don't desire to push my beliefs on anyone else. I would much rather them come and see for themselves, as Christ said. However, as a result of this identity, I grew up with this message of suffering. I heard it from priests, bishops, Sunday school teachers, and parents. No matter what I did, I couldn't escape this message. I even saw it in our beautiful mosaics and icons. Somehow, suffering was made beautiful and victorious in them. It surely is no accident that the greatest and most glorious feast day of the year for us, as you know, is Pascha, or Easter as the Westerners have come to call it. But for the few who have lived under a rock for the last 2,000 years, this is the day we venerate and worship the suffering and death of the Son of God and his triumph over death through his willful bearing of this torture on behalf of all. Given this kind of constant bombardment of this message led to one inevitable thought. If Christ could suffer and die in the most brutal way possible, if the Son of God could cry and beg his Father to save him, if the Messiah could stumble under the weight of his cross on the way to his own death, then why couldn't I, as lowly as I was? As a child, I think I kind of ignored this message because, simply put, who wants to willingly sign up for a life of suffering? So, like the prodigal son, I took my inheritance and I ran. But after years of aimless wandering and simply hoping things would get better without taking any responsibility for them, I found myself stumbling across your lectures, and the message finally resonated with me. Life is suffering and pain whether we like it or not. You're born into this world screaming and crying, you grow old and die in what is generally an unpleasant way. And you suffer all along the way through breakups and bad grades, the loss of family and friends, ideological possession, and so much more. However, it wasn't just the epiphany of the reality of suffering you imparted that resonated with me, but also, and much more importantly, your answer to it. The only way to alleviate any of this suffering was to bear my burden, or my cross perhaps, and give life meaning by transcending suffering through responsibility and competence. After this realization, I have to say that something like falling in love with you occurred. Not that I am in love with you, though I would be more than happy to take you out to what might be your first coffee date in years if you are so inclined. At first it was slow. I would watch a video here or there during lunch or a walk to class, taking what kernels of wisdom I could find, and then I was, all at once, suddenly diving into all of your work. It happened instantly. I found myself watching anything of yours that I could, and as a result of this, I began to take much more responsibility for my life. I started to work out more, I kept a journal, I took my studies more seriously, I worked on my relationships with my family, my father specifically, and things truly became better for the first time in a long time. You helped me to discover that life had a meaning built into it because of its suffering. I learned that I was tougher, smarter, faster, and far more loved than I had previously thought. And I slowly, very slowly, became more and more competent, or at the very least, I aimed for it. And I began to understand that the world which I was so frightened of as a younger man was actually full of opportunities for me to become a better man than I was before. I owe all of this to you, and I cannot thank you enough for quite literally saving my young life. I am, of course, familiar with the variety of attacks and rebuttals against you on the internet and in the media. I've watched your discussion with Slavoj Žižek, I have listened to the Kathy Newman debate, and I have seen your likeness as the Red Skull. Yet, I have found many of these attacks unconvincing. I think people tend to misconstrue your message in order to confirm their own bias. I think it must be easier for them to attack their own images of you rather than attacking you yourself. To them, you are seen as a threat to everything that has ideologically possessed them. In their eyes, you are an obstacle to the dismantlement of the tyrannic, patriarchal society that has infected the West. They perceive you as defending the greatest evil of our times and empowering its legions of demons and minions to do your will. However, I know you are not a politician, one of the many reasons I like you, but rather you are a psychologist. You are not here primarily to push bills or agendas, though it can be necessary to stand up for what you believe in sometimes, and that is something I respect deeply. But rather, you seem to be here to impart what wisdom you have gathered, the gold from the dragon, if you will, and to give hope to those who will listen. Your work, specifically your focus on helping the individual to better themselves, reminds me of something Saint Seraphim of Sarov, a greatly revered saint in the Orthodox faith, once said. Quote, "Acquire a spirit of peace, and thousands around you will be saved." End quote. In my personal and wildly unprofessional opinion, you are not a man who drives a machine, but rather a man who builds a fire and offers light and warmth to all who are willing to sit. Your concerns are not wealth, they are not power. I don't think you want fame or reverence. I truly, truly believe in my heart that in the end, all you want is for us to be better than who we were yesterday. A few years ago now, I found myself soul-searching in Russia and reading Dostoevsky. And seeing as I'm an Orthodox Christian, none of this should be a surprise. During my reading of the brothers Karamazov, I came across the most interesting chapter. But first, a short disclaimer. I love the Grand Inquisitor. It may very well be the single greatest chapter ever written in the history of the English language in scope, meaning, and depth. However, for me, this was not the highlight of the book. Rather, what struck me was a passage inserted into the book by Dostoevsky as a cathartic dedication to his child who had passed away during its writing, if memory serves. This passage is contained in one of the early chapters concerning the elder Zosima. In this chapter, a woman comes to the elder, revered by many as a wonder worker, and asks for his help because her little boy passed away recently. Again, if memory serves, this child in the book was named after Dostoevsky's own child who'd passed. And she begs for help from the elder because she is haunted by her son's absence. She tells the elder if she could only hear his little feet again, if she could only see him again, even if it was from afar, she would be all right. The elder responds to her and says that consolation is not what she needs, but rather she needs to weep for her child. She needs to feel this pain fully and thoroughly, and that with every tear she should also remember that her child is in heaven among the angels and with God. He continues and says that every time she weeps, her child rejoices and tells God how much he is loved by his own mother. He concludes by telling the woman to return to her husband, who had turned to drinking in her absence, and that he will pray for her, the child, and her family. The reason I bring this up is because while reading this particular bit from this chapter, I realized that in my mind, you and Elder Zosima are the same archetypal type, the indiscriminate wise man sought by many as a source of healing. While I cannot directly compare you to an elder of my faith, real or fiction, in good conscience with my God, I will say this: you are both men who impart truth and healing to all who seek it. You don't aim merely to console, but you aim primarily to truly heal and to foster a better life in those who beg your help, even when they cannot see a way out themselves. Please understand, this is among the highest compliments of which I am capable. Finally, I must apologize to you, Dr. Peterson, because while I have taken your messages to heart, which is to say that I have acted in such a way that is indicative of my belief in them, I have since relapsed a little bit. I think I probably drink a little too much these days. I've been a glutton and gained more weight than I care to admit. I have not been good about cultivating fruitful and romantic relationships. Quick to anger, spite, and resentment. This is beginning to sound a lot like a confession to a priest, though, given my comparison between you and the elder Zosima, I suppose that is proper. In short, I have not been doing everything I can be doing in order to better my life or to bring myself closer to my own personal aim. Or as you might say, I have not been treating myself like someone I am responsible for taking care of. There are reasons for this, of course, as there always are. These last few years have held a variety of traumas that have sliced me to my core a plethora of times, though I would not share them in such a public statement like this. Suffering is suffering, and what you need to know is that in these last few years, suffering has won quite a few battles, and now I find myself once again in the stables with the pigs like the prodigal son. However, I do have this rare chance to thank you personally, because that is what this letter is really about. It is the conscious and fully aware monument to recognizing my own shortcomings and realigning myself with my aim. The written promise to myself to try my best to put one foot in front of the other in order to be better than who I was yesterday. A feat I would not have been capable of before I began to listen to your ideas. So thank you, Dr. Peterson, for this opportunity to share a little bit of my story, for listening to my gratitude, my victories, my failings, and for giving me the tools I need in order to clean up my room one more time. I don't know if you'll ever hear this. One voice gets lost in thousands, and I know you have many people writing you letters saying almost exactly what I have said above. But the idea that this is out there, and that there is the slight chance that you may stumble across my small voice, makes me smile. Thank you so much for all you have done, least of all for me, but for everyone. You truly are a light in the darkness, a monument of hope, and one of my very favorite friends whom I have yet to meet. God bless you. Sincerely, Scapegoat.